But the other challenge that I face personally while doing the Filipino story is the fact that, I am Filipino-American and my language is mostly English. And so there are a lot of people who would rather receive their the culture and the things that we share in the Filipino story through a real Filipino, A lot of, I guess not a lot. There are a few comments who kind of critique me for not knowing my own native language. Welcome back to the Soul Podcast. I'm Bani Logroño, writer and director of The Filipino Story. And we're going to talk about the Filipino story. So how it first began, like I mentioned in the previous episode, is a Filipino-American businessman named Tony Olaez. He contacted my wife and I during the pandemic. At that time, all our projects and documentaries that we were working on, it got canceled because everything was shut down. So this kind of came as a blessing that someone wanted to create an animated series, and they chose us as the filmmakers who would do it. Filipino historian professor named Xiao Chua, he was the one who recommended us to do the Filipino story because we always worked with him in our previous World War II documentaries. And so when Tony asked Professor Xiao who is the best filmmaker to work on this animated series about telling the story and the identity of the Filipino to an audience who might not know what it means to be Filipino, Professor Xiao said, I can only think of one name. That's me. So thanks, Prof. So that's how we pretty much got on board. Now, to just kind of share Tony's story a little bit, he grew up in San Diego, California, and he grew up not wanting to be Filipino because growing up, he would always hear in the news that the Philippines is full of poverty and crime and corruption. It was that kind of stories that was being fed to him through the media. And on top of that, in school, I guess he was growing up during a time when people would often bully other people for how they look and the food that they bring to school is very foreign to Americans at that time. And so, he just didn't like his Filipino identity. And it wasn't until he was 40 years old that he had the opportunity to go back to the Philippines for the very first time. And he visited the informal settlements here, the local communities. And it was there that he discovered the core value of kapwa that I mentioned last episode. Our value of seeing ourselves in each other. Because he went here with the expectation that he was going to give something to the people in these communities that, are lacking in resources. Usually that's why a lot of people come here, right? Is to help out, especially if you're someone who has a lot to give. So he came here as an American with an expectation of being asked to give things to people. But what happened instead is that people here gave him something in return, something with even greater value, which is that Filipino heart, that kapwa. And so it melted his hardened heart, this heart that didn't like his Filipino identity. And so he came here as an American and he went back as a Filipino. He often describes himself as a born-again Filipino because it was such a profound transformation to him. And ever since then, that was around 20 years ago, he is on this committed mission to kind of share that transformation with everyone else because a lot of people overseas, the diaspora, the Filipino diaspora, have the same experience as him. Like I said before, 3 out of 10 Filipinos aren't proud of their identity, and that includes Filipinos who grew up and live outside the Philippines. So he's on this mission, And initially, after that initial experience here, he decided to establish this nonprofit organization called the Filipino School, which is this after school program that ideally Filipino kids, and even Filipino parents, Filipino-American parents would go after their regular school and learn about the language and the culture and the food and all these things, and that's how uh, a transformation can possibly happen. But during the pandemic, the Filipino school was shut down, and so he had to pivot and figure out a way to share our identity and our culture to these people who don't know about their Filipino identity. And so, watching the Bible Project on YouTube, he got this idea that, oh, these are very entertaining, very captivating videos. Maybe there can be a Filipino version of this series, something that shares the beauty and the greatness and the spirit of the Filipino in animated form. And so that's the initial idea of the Filipino story came from him. And for the longest time, he went through, like, I imagine, hundreds of different creatives and storytellers until Xiao Chua recommended us, and when he told us his story and his initial vision for it, that's when I wrote the first episode of the animated series. What does it mean to be Filipino? And for the longest time, I thought I had a very confusing upbringing. Growing up in so many different places, having one foot in the motherland and the other foot in the diaspora in America. I had this confusing identity, but as it turned out, that type of history and upbringing is exactly the type of history that is required to share and explain what it means to be Filipino in the most simple and clear way to an audience that may not have a understanding of that. And so that's how we got the project. Of course, there was a little bump in the way. I mentioned in the previous episode that we did get fired because there was a certain direction that Tony wanted to try out. But after that, we got back on board, and that's why I'm doing the project even up to now. From the animated series, which is consisting of 6 episodes, to further expound and explain and flesh out the Filipino identity even more. We've expanded into this production where we're interviewing other culture bearers, national artists, Filipino psychologists, professors, historians, to further explain this kapwa, this bayanihan, this kabutihang loob, this idea of ginhawa. All these things are what make up what it means to be Filipino and the core values that this culture possesses. And so it's that's how it started, and that's how it got to where it is today. So throughout a lot of Philippine history, our past has oftentimes been told by someone else. And that comes from the fact that we have a history of colonization. The Spanish for 3 centuries, the Japanese, and the Americans. And it's because of this colonial past that our history books and the way our past has been recorded has oftentimes been told in those people's perspective instead of our own. And even after that period in our history, I guess a lot of us just got used to looking at our past in that way. And so in recent times, there has been a movement to change that, to rewrite, or not rewrite, but to look back at our history from from the lens of our own people. And I guess that started with Jose Rizal, our national hero. And I know that a very prolific historian, Zeo Salazar, um, is spearheaded a movement just like that. And of course, our friend Xiao Chua is also trying to tell our history through our own perspective. And so that's what we do with the Filipino story. Um, we want to tell the stories of our past through our own perspective instead of through the perspectives of others. And it's great that my wife and I were able to kind of begin that method of storytelling through our World War II documentaries as kind of a warm up to what we're doing now, because it's the same thing in World War II. You know, when I remember in high school when I first learned about that time in our history and looking back at the textbooks I had at school, uh, there was only a small paragraph, or it was just even two sentences about World War II in the Philippines. And what it said was that the Americans saved the Philippines during World War II. And, I guess you can look at history in that perspective, but that kind of ignores the contributions that our own Filipino heroes had during that time in our history. And so that's what we really want to do. That's part of the reason why we're creating and telling the stories that we are in the Filipino story, is to bring honor and to acknowledge the heroes of our past, and to finally have their stories be told. Another big issue that I think we're facing as a culture is that the stories of our ancestors, our lolos and lolas, are disappearing as a result of migration. When a family migrates to a different country and they leave the old generation behind, the oral transmission of the stories of that family get left behind as well, and those stories vanish. And so we want to use our platform to preserve those stories, and so that's how we kind of choose which stories to tell. We always hear about our colonial past, right? Especially during the time when we were colonized by the Spanish Empire. And for a lot of my career, we've covered a lot of stories during World War II. Currently, I think I'm really intrigued by how our ancient ancestors lived, our people before the Spanish came, and what it was like to live back then. So, and it's interesting because that's when these core values were born: kapwa and bayanihan and kabutihang loob. These are the core values that still exist today, and it's interesting to try and figure out how it was able to survive through all the struggles that we had through our history. But it's also interesting to kind of figure out and discover how those core values were born as well. And so I think that's a time in our history where a lot of Filipinos are also interested in nowadays, is our ancient past, and I'm glad that we're able to look at a part of that through the Filipino story, through speaking to historians, professors, and archaeologists. Recently, we spoke with someone who wrote about the history of dogs in the Philippines. His name is Dr. Ian Alfonso. And, even that has such rich cultural significance to it, because his whole reason for writing that book is because even the way that we look at our dogs, right? The general way that Filipinos perceive our dogs is that when they're purebred or when they have a specific breed, it's put above dogs that are, asong Pinoy or Aspins. We put greater value on other breeds rather than our own. Um, but this, but Dr. Alfonso, he looked at the history of Aspins, and actually, our ancestors looked at these dogs with a lot of respect and reverence. Another term for a bayani is mangangaso, which is also a hunter, and it has the word aso in it, right, which means dog, and that's because they looked at dogs as a symbol of strength, as a symbol of a creature that is very skilled in hunting and is therefore very useful to the community. And so it's that kind um, of reverence to even our animals that is interesting to discover about our ancient history, and it's those kinds of information and stories that we love uncovering through our platform, and we're excited to share about through the Filipino story. So that's an episode that is probably gonna come out after this one. So look forward to that. The greatness of Philippine dogs. So I don't think that there was a specific turning point for me. It's kind of like our ancient tradition of tattooing, right? It's called mambabatok. The way that our ancient ancestors and our living legend, Wang Od, she still preserves that ancient way of tattooing, which is taking a thorn and kind of hitting someone's skin over and over and over until it leaves a mark. And in a way, that's kind of what happened with me, and I hope that's what's happening with our audience as well. We hit them with story after story after story of the greatness of our people and the greatness of our past, our core values, over and over and over until it leaves a mark in their hearts. And so it's not a particular story that made me realize the beauty of our culture, but it's the whole journey itself, you know. Slowly but surely, each story makes that mark in my heart deeper and deeper, and I hope it's doing the same with our audience as well. So, the mission of the Filipino story is actually to unite our people under one story. We believe that there's a division between motherland and diaspora. There's also a division with our social classes, politically. There's a lot of division in Philippine culture in general. But what we've found that works, that brings our people together, is stories. You know, our national hero, Jose Rizal, he's a storyteller. And he's our hero not because he had great weapons, but he had great words. And he used his words not to kill people, but to bring them to life, to give them life. And so that's what we're trying to do, I guess. We're trying to tell stories, trying to bring our people together under one story in the same way that Jose Rizal's stories brought people together, igniting their Bayani spirit and sparking a movement in his generation. We want to ignite a similar movement in our generation. Like I mentioned before, only 3 out of 10 Filipinos are proud of their culture, and I think the reason for poverty and corruption, part of the reason for those things, is because of that lack of pride, that lack of respecting the ancestors that came before us. And I was a part of that in the past. I didn't understand why it was important, but now I do. And it is our hope that by telling these stories, and especially the story that we're trying to tell through the animated series, that we bring that pride, we ignite that Bayani spirit we ignite that kapwa within our people, not just in the motherland, but in the diaspora as well, to bring our people together as one, so that a Filipino here in the motherland can count on a Filipino-American or a Filipino-Canadian on the other side of the world, that they look at each other not as strangers, but as family, as brothers and sisters. And that is what I believe the reason why God created Filipino culture, is to allow the rest of the world to see, this is what kapwa is like, and this value of kapwa is something that is universal, that, the rest of the world can learn from as well. And so when you ask me what kind of future I see for the Philippines and for our people, it's for our people to be one, for all our people to experience ginhawa, that feeling of being comfortable because you know that you're taken care of. You have a community who cares for you and sees you and loves you wherever you go. And hopefully that future can be realized by telling these stories. So we work with a lot of historians and professors to make sure that the stories and the information that we're telling in these videos are accurate, or at least that they come from, some kind of historical foundation and cultural foundation. And what we agreed on is that Filipino culture and our values, we can distill it to these three core values of bayanihan, kapwa, and kabutihang loob. And so if these really are the core values of what it means to be Filipino, then we should be able to find it through any kind of Filipino story, right? And so far, that has been the case through the interviews that we, through the people that we talk to, the people that we interview. That seems to be these three core values seem to be the driving force that allows Filipinos to be who they are. By exemplifying these core values, Filipinos can be who they were born to be, basically. When we create these stories, I try to look for these core values in the stories that people share, even with the people who are not Filipino that we interview. Katrine Degia, who is one of the first people who received a degree on Filipino psychology, who's also the wife of national artist Kidlat Tahimik and the writer of a book called Kapwa. She's actually the one who first shared with us that this is the core value. This is what I've discovered makes Filipinos unique from everyone else in the world, this core value of kapwa. So someone like that, while on the other hand, influencers like this Korean content creator, Jessica Lee, and also this American vlogger, Tagalog Kurt, they express these values of kapwa and kabutihang loob in their own way as well. And so we just find these core values everywhere, and they are kind of the foundation of all the stories that we share in the Filipino story. And that's why our animated series are centered around those three core values. The Filipino Story is a non-profit organization. We're a really small team, and right now we're actually on a hiatus from uploading on YouTube because we didn't expect the growth that we would have when we first launched last year in May. And then in, I think, about 6 months, we reached 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. And we just grew such a large audience in such a short period of time. And it has been kind of overwhelming, and because we didn't expect such a rapid growth, that's why we decided to hit the brakes a little bit and make sure that once we start moving again, it's in the right direction and we're not swayed by the current, so to speak. And so, yeah, I guess you can call that burnout. Um, but the other challenge that I face personally while doing the Filipino story is the fact that I am Filipino-American, and my language is mostly English, and so there are a lot of people who, you know, would rather receive their the culture and the things that we share in the Filipino story through a real Filipino. A lot of, not I guess not a lot. There are a few comments who kind of critique me for not knowing my own native language. That sometimes get to me. To be hated by people that you're trying to help, uh, it can be discouraging, and so sometimes it's difficult to read those comments and to continue on. Thankfully, I do have a community around me, and even though we're a small team, it's still a team of people that are very positive and encouraging, and that's why we can get through challenges like that. And it's not like I'm not trying. Marunong naman ako mag-Tagalog ng konti. and I'm learning each and every day. So yeah, it's difficult when you read comments like that. That was more towards the beginning when all of a sudden a lot of eyeballs and attention was on us. Now I'm more used to it, and I don't think it's gotten less. It's just that I've learned to not look at the comments anymore, and understand that this mission and this work that we're doing, it's not about me. It's about everyone, and it's really a testament to the transformation I had from someone who placed his identity on the work he does to someone who's now doing the work because he believes that our cultural identity is something that is given to us by God, and we were born as Filipinos for a reason, and that has nothing to do with me. So just knowing that and being aware of that, that helps. That's what helps me get through, those looking at those kinds of comments. Well, if there's one thing that I want people to get from the Filipino story, it's just to, well, you don't have to be necessarily proud of being Filipino, but just understand that you were born as a Filipino for a reason, and to not acknowledge that, or for that to be something that you look down on, is to look down on your own identity and to look down on the destiny that God may have planned for you. We have a very intentional God. He all created us for a very intentional purpose, an intentional reason. That's what I firmly believe in, and that's why we tell the stories that we do. And so I invite everyone to join us on this journey, all Filipinos to join us on this journey, to discover the greatness of the Filipino heart, to discover what it truly means to be Filipino. And to me, it really is. Being Filipino means to be part of a lineage of people who treat each other with love, who treat each other with kapwa, who look at each other as kapwa, seeing each other as the same. And by accepting that about yourself, I think that you can live a much more fulfilled life, the life that God has planned for you. And we can one day get to that dream of our people being one, being able to experience that cultural ginhawa that we one day hope to achieve for everybody, and for these divisions to no longer be there, to bridge all our people together and look at each other not as strangers but as one family. So thank you so much for listening to me. And if you want to follow our journey, if you want to follow and watch our videos, we're the Filipino Story Studio on YouTube, and the Filipino Story Official on Instagram, and the Filipino Story on Facebook and TikTok. I don't know why we had different names for different platforms. It just turned out that way. But it's going to be on the screen. Follow all the platforms, please, and support us on this journey of bringing our people together. And I'll see you guys next week for the next guest of the Soul Podcast.